Hey everybody, I'm Hugh Brownstone for Three Blind Men and an Elephant, and welcome to part 3 of my review of the Leica SL 3 years after launch. Last week, we traced the history of Leica before it was Leica, when first it was Optisches Institute, then Leitz, up to the launch of the original Leica 1 in 1925, with a nod to the success that followed. I used the metaphor of DNA to understand what really makes a Leica, and promised to explore in this episode how the ensuing environment shaped the brand as well. Nature versus nurture, if you like. Though, come to think of it, maybe the best metaphor for last week is that of the origin story. So this week, let's delve into what I'll call the amazing adventures of Leica. Which, while a clear nod to the comics, if you haven't already done so, I highly recommend reading Michael Chabon's The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, is fascinating, horrifying, exciting, provocative, informative, and quintessentially human. But before I do, a quick reminder from our new Department of Friendly Neighborhood Commerce that every time you purchase anything through one of our B&H affiliate links down below, you are automatically entered to win the Luxley Viola on-camera bi-color LED with diffuser. This is an item I first tested with a little help from my friends because I needed just that kind of capability and liked it so much, we decided to give one away. It's an easy way for you to show your support of us, and it's an easy way for us to show our appreciation of you, our YouTube audience. We'll announce the winner on May 22nd. Now, I'm going to sum up the impact of the environment on Leica in a few minutes up front, and then really go into the details. So you have a choice if you want to stick with me to the end or not, although, actually, yeah, you always have that choice. Here we go. Of course, the environment changed radically between the time the first Leica was launched in 1925 and now, almost 100 years later. And those changes affected Leica profoundly, of course. Remember, the original Leica solves a new problem for a new technology: how to travel with a camera small enough, light enough, and simple enough to take hiking into the mountains. This is at a time when German manufacturing and optical design skill stand head and shoulders above just about everyone else. Similarly, Swiss watchmaking is best in class. And these two combine to become the foundational Leica DNA when Ernst Leitz arrives in 1864. And the definition of that problem with its solution springs from the mind of a single man who arrives almost half a century later, Oscar Barnack. The Leica is a side business, a gamble for Ernst Leitz GmbH, a company whose expertise in, reputation for, and cash flow from precision microscopes with which to support such a new product launch is second to none, in spite of appalling hyperinflation and the Great Depression. The lenses Leitz subsequently develops for the interchangeable lens version of the Leica Standard of 1930, are extraordinary for the era and become a tremendous revenue stream in their own right. Over the ensuing decades, war, intellectual property theft, a rush of new entrants, the re-entry of old competitors, most especially Zeiss, torn apart at the end of World War II, and the improvements in alternative technologies like single-lens reflex cameras and internal light meters, along with the general diffusion of information and skills on a global basis, and finally, the rise of computer-aided manufacturing and optical design, force Leitz to focus on company needs rather than user needs, which in turn become a series of financial and product decisions which bring it to the precipice of bankruptcy. Back to our comics metaphor. If Leica were a Marvel or DC Comics superhero in today's superhero franchise-driven Hollywood, by 2003 in our story, we'd be at that point in the movie when it looks like Kryptonite has killed Superman, Captain America is dead, Black Lightning has forsaken his superpowers, or perhaps more aptly on the one hand, but I acknowledge wholly missing how brilliant the original Leitz company and Leica camera were. On the other, Groot dies and then is reborn as baby Groot. Ay vey, sometimes I amaze myself. Well, let's get back to the details of our actual story, which in the end are much more interesting. So, right, the Leica 1 launches in 1925 to accolades at the Leipzig Spring Fair. In 1930, Leitz offers a new model called the Standard, the beginning of the Leica interchangeable screw mount era. By 1931, Leitz will have produced almost 60,000 cameras cumulatively. Over the course of the next 6 years, as Leitz introduces the Leica 2, the first model with integrated rangefinder, and the Leica 3, which adds slow shutter speeds via a separate dial, almost 500,000 more will be sold. But perhaps even better measures of its success are the answers to these two questions. One, how does the Leica change the world? And two, precisely who uses them? To which I can only respond, one, the light, fast, and bulletproof little camera basically creates the category of photojournalism as we know it even today. It fuels the rise of photo magazines, which one can argue find their ultimate expression in Henry Luce's 1936 inaugural issue of Life magazine. And two, beyond well-heeled enthusiasts, since the Leica even then is a premium-priced product, many of the greatest artists, street photographers, war photographers, photojournalists, documentary photographers, and fashion photographers of all time use it. Imogen Cunningham, Man Ray, Alexander Rodchenko, Andre Cortez, Alfred Eisenstadt, Walker Evans, Margaret Bourke-White, Andreas Feininger, Henri Cartier-Bresson, Yusuf Karsh, Robert Capa, Cornell Capa, W. Eugene Smith, Helmut Newton, Ernst Haas, Diane Arbus, Vivian Maier for a little bit, Jerry Winogrand, Jean-Luc Sieff, an untold number of other photographers whose work I do not know, and most infamously, Leni Riefenstahl, writer, director, and producer of the greatest and most destructive propaganda film of all time, 1935's Triumph of the Will. Now, all of these photographers will build and shape the Leica mystique by creating some of the signature images the Leica makes possible, and offer a simultaneously breathtaking and mortifying segue back into the world from which the Leica springs and evolves. The Great Depression proves itself beyond the capabilities of ordinary politicians. It wipes out people and governments around the globe, including the extraordinarily progressive but all too brief Weimar Republic in Germany. When the Great Depression doesn't kill them off altogether, it also forces companies to merge willy-nilly, like the 1926 formation of Zeiss Icon, but hold that thought, and foments the rise of Adolf Hitler, and Mussolini, and Franco, and... Look, I'm going to keep this brief because trying to do any more would be a profound injustice to so many people in so many ways. But the points I want to make here quickly are these, which I want to stress yet again, in the end, are less a German story than a human story. Our story. So, one, the Leica, a premium-priced product for professionals and the affluent, is an incredible success even as much of civilization crumbles around it and madmen come to power. Two, when a madman comes to power, almost always enabled by the failures and delegitimization of the government that preceded it, even the best of us will have to wash off the stink. There will never be a clearer time to assess who we are, what's important, what we do, what we say, and how we navigate through the worst of humanity and ourselves to survive. There will never be a better time than times like these to use photography and filmmaking for good or evil. At the intersection of photography, filmmaking, commerce, politics, and history, this is the critical lesson for those of us who are visual artists. We should use our skills to help ensure it never gets to this point. Because it's too easy to ignore what happens, to dismiss what happens when the full weight of a murderous, corrupt, and immoral regime is brought to bear on even the best of us, as happens with Ernst Leitz II. Under enormous pressure for years, Ernst Leitz II, now 71, finally joins the Nazi Party. It is 1941, the point at which the Nazi regime is at the height of its power. France has fallen. Britain is on its heels. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the USSR, has just begun. And the US has not yet joined the war, nor looks like it will. The company with his name on it uses slave labor. The company with his name on it is a critical component of the Nazi war machine by supplying optics, not cameras, optics, sights, to the armed forces. It is the darkest chapter in Leica's history, a chapter which in virtually every other major German company figures. Does it ever occur to you that humanity has simply got more sophisticated about hiding or evolving to a softer, prettier veneer over the same things even today? Let me suggest you take a look at Behemoth, A History of the Factory and the Making of the Modern World by Joshua B. Freeman. Anyway, yet again, yes, this is a German story, but no, it is not. It is a story about people. It is a story about us. But in a smaller story, too little known until now, probably still too little known. One strand of that foundational Leica DNA of which I spoke in episode 2, an empathy for and an appreciation of fellow human beings, remains intact. Beginning almost a decade earlier, 1933, Ernst Leitz II helps a small but significant number of Jews escape Nazi Germany. He understands early just how dire things are, and at great risk to himself and his family, secures the safety of dozens, if not hundreds, of people, dispatching them to the United States and other countries under the cover of the Leitz Company. Those risks are not hypothetical. At one point, the Gestapo detains Leitz's own daughter, who is reunited with her family only after Leitz pays what is apparently an enormous ransom. By 1939, the risks are too great, and what has come to be called today the Leica Freedom Train stops. As a result, when the 1,000-year Reich ends just a few years later, Leitz's capitulation leaves the factory intact and its employees alive, which give it a tremendous head start. Its intellectual property, however, is another matter. The Allies make all German patents freely available. Leitz has no patents in the Soviet Union, and however it happens, Japan and China also seem unconcerned about IP. After the war, cheap Leica copies start popping up everywhere. There are literally hundreds of knockoffs of varying quality, some of which become quite good, like Canon's 1951 2B. Leitz will continue to produce the original Leica and its variants through 1965, but the handwriting is already on the wall. I mean, it's on the wall as early as 1936 when Zeiss Icon, remember them, introduces the Contax II with integrated rangefinder viewfinder, something the Leica does not have, and this is big. As we just walked through, the Second World War intervenes, but it becomes a matter of urgency after the war. Leitz needs something new. It cannot compete with its own ghosts, especially at drastically lower price points. And its arch rival has delivered, some will argue, an Uber Leica, a knockout blow to original Leica 1s, 2s, and 3s. Even if the Contax does not have the same build quality nor beauty, it is fierce. Thus, in 1954, Leica introduces the most iconic of all Leicas, the M series. Compared to the original Leica 3, it's bigger, heavier. Yet the M is still relatively small, still optically superb, still jewel-like in its precision, and built like a tank. It has an entirely new bayonet mount, a new design vocabulary straight out of the era in which it is conceived, mid-century modern, and like the Contax II, now sports a single integrated viewfinder and rangefinder. It is another masterpiece, and over the next half-century, the camera is updated again and again, becoming the photojournalist's and combat photographer's camera of the era, supplanting the speed graphic. Ernst Leitz II lives to see the launch, but dies just 2 years later. His 3 sons take over. But history has a way of accelerating. Timeframes collapse, and competitors continuously improve. Within 5 years, Nikon launches the F, and Canon launches the Canon Flex 35mm SLRs. It takes half a decade for Leitz to respond fully when it launches its own SLR, the Leica Flex. I'm not even going to talk about the original VisoFlex system, except to say, paradoxically, that the first version of this single-lens reflex retrofit accessory for Leica rangefinder cameras comes onto the market as the Ploot all the way back in 1936. The same year, a different German company introduces the first production 35mm, the Ihagee Kine Exacta. Side note, a Soviet company builds the first full-frame 35mm SLR prototype in 1934, but doesn't release it until 1937. It is called the Sport. In any case, by 1964, Leitz has lost 5 years' worth of experience that the Japanese camera manufacturers have, and it's difficult to will away decades of rangefinder DNA. As the advantages of the modern SLR become clear, no parallax, no lens obstructing the viewfinder, no need for an accessory finder, no need to periodically adjust the rangefinder, and the advantages of its Japanese architects become just as clear, skilled, less expensive labor, Edward Deming-inspired post-war obsession with quality, and a culture every bit as precise and ambitious, Leitz attempts to partner its way into this segment. In 1976, it introduces its R-series SLRs, co-developed with Minolta. Not enough. Leitz tries one last time by making an SLR with its own design and production, the R8, and its successor, the R9, which first come to market in 1996. These two cameras have their own design vocabulary. Yay, but maybe it's fairest to say it's a design for design's sake. Camera functionality not as advanced as other, less expensive cameras in the market. If it hopes to pull a Porsche, replacing an icon like the 911 with a much newer, more modern product like the 1928, it fails, just as Porsche does. By 2002, the R8 and 9 are gone. Somewhere along the way, I don't know when, Ernst Leitz GmbH splits into 3 separate companies, Leica Camera, Leica Geosystems, and Leica Microsystems. Thus, what I'll simply call Leica from this point forward, although I've probably already done that, pursues a parallel path with its rangefinders. It tries to make rangefinders more affordable, co-developing a 35mm camera called the CL with Minolta. Leica releases the CL in 1973 to positive reviews, but with a dramatically lower price than any of the M rangefinders and Minolta's own less expensive version in the marketplace, the CL is discontinued just 3 years later. On the other hand, in an effort to make Leica rangefinders more expensive, it releases vanity versions of the M. Feh. It also enters the point-and-shoot market in 1989, again with the help from Minolta. More feh. At some point during this time, maybe Leica does a deal with Fuji for a compact camera. I only saw one very brief mention of it, but it is fascinating to contemplate how, if it's true, it ties into Fuji's subsequent and recent success with rangefinder-inspired digital cameras like the X Pro 2. I do know that in 2000, Leica partners with Panasonic on digital audiovisual equipment lenses. In 2001, they ink a second agreement to cooperate on digital cameras. The following year, Panasonic introduces the breakthrough DVX100, a dedicated standard definition video camera that can shoot 24 frames progressive and sports a Leica branded integrated zoom lens. I actually buy one of these a couple of years later. Even so, By 2004, Leica is about to declare bankruptcy. Superman is dead. Captain America is dead. Groot is dead. But then a former school teacher, self-avowed leftist, co-founder of the German Green Party, car guy, real estate investor, and heir to the largest paper and pulp company in Austria, that's all I know about him so far, but man, I want to meet this guy, steps in and buys the company. His name is Andreas Kaufmann. 1 year later, Leica Camera AG announces Sonder optics and introduces Leica Cine lenses. 3 years after that, 2008, Leica introduces a digital medium format single lens reflex camera, the S, and finally, its first digital M, the APS-H censored M8. Both are uniquely Leica. Years later, I end up buying a used M8, my first Leica since the 3A, and the stellar manual focus 35mm f2 Summicron and 90mm f2.8 Elmarit. In 2009, Leica introduces the APS-C-based fixed lens X. In 2013, the Panasonic-derived C compact. It's fair to say that the Kaufmann reign ignites a smaller, more tightly focused, pragmatic Leica that even so seems to understand its roots and the value of them. In 2014, an entirely new interchangeable lens camera arrives in the form of the Leica T. This too is an APS-C camera with a body machined from a solid block of aluminum, a minimalist design aesthetic, a smartphone-like touch user interface on its large rear panel, the new L mount, but no integrated viewfinder. It's also the same year Leica and Panasonic expand their agreement to use Leica branding on Panasonic products and Panasonic technology in Leica products through 2019. The following year, Leica introduces a radically different camera. It is a full-frame, DSLR form factor, mirrorless beast, which also uses the L mount, the Leica SL. And in our next episode, I'm going to show and tell you all about it. Cliffhanger. If you like what you've seen here today, please give a thumbs up, subscribe, join the conversation in the comments section below. Add to a playlist, share. Consider supporting our work by using our affiliate links or making a contribution directly via the PayPal link below. As always, we thank you for it. For Three Blind Men and an Elephant, I'm Hugh Brownstone. See you next time.